Hi, it's Jane Mason. How are you today? I hope you're well. Now, today I'm going to talk to you about baker's percentages, very specifically making the best focaccia on the planet in any size that you want. Now, if you're a regular baker, you know all about baker's percentages. And if you're not a regular baker, you don't need to know about baker's percentages, with the exception of making the best focaccia in the world in the size that you want it. Now, why is this important? You might want to make a focaccia for 10 and you have an enormous lasagna pan. You might want to make a focaccia for 6 or 4 and you've got a little brownie pan. You might want to make a little bit of a bigger focaccia for maybe 8. Or you might just only have one pan in your arsenal and this is it, and it's the only pan you have. So every focaccia recipe, either it's too much dough or it's too little dough. Now, there's a certain amount of experimentation that you will need to do to understand how much dough you need for example, this pan, or whatever pan you want, or whatever pan you have. And I'll get into that in a second. And what you need to know, the golden key here, is understanding baker's percentages. Now, if you skibble over to my page on locals, you can continue with this video. You can get the recipe for the best focaccia in the world, and you're going to know how to adjust it depending on the pan that you have or the size that you want. Okay, so I'm going to put these down. Locals is great. It's a reasonably new social media platform, but unlike some other social media platforms, it's 100% dedicated to helping us create communities around things that we like. So there are no ads, there's no interference, the communities are there, and then we create and curate them by ourselves, the members who join the community. So I think you'll like it. It's pretty cool, and Virtuous Bread has a channel over there, so skibble over there and you can see the rest of this video and understand baker's percentages and their role in baking the best focaccia in the world, the size that you want it. So, quick talk about baker's percentages. Roughly speaking, and there are 100 million exceptions to this rule, you will turn out a decent loaf of bread every time if you use a certain percentage of water to flour, yeast to flour, and salt to flour. So you start with the weight of your flour. And for those of you who use cups and spoons, it may be time to transition to having a little digital scale and working in grams, okay? Because trust me, baker's percentages are a lot easier to calculate when you're working in grams and when you're actually weighing the ingredients. So as a rule of thumb, you use 2% of the flour weight in salt. Some people balk at that. I think that salt is very important. I don't eat a lot of salt in the rest of my life. I don't eat pre-prepared food, so I'm perfectly happy to have a 2% of the flour weight in salt in my bread. Roughly speaking, you would use 2% of the flour weight in fresh yeast, 1% of the flour weight in dry active yeast, and 0.5% of the flour weight in instant yeast. So what do we mean by that? If you have, for example, a kilo of flour, okay, most of us can probably do 10% of a kilo is 100 grams, and 1% of a kilo is 10 grams, which means 2% of a kilo is 20 grams, and 0.5% of a kilo is 5 grams. So with our kilo of flour, we would put in for salt, 2%, 20 grams, okay, and for fresh yeast, 20 grams, for dry yeast, 10 grams, and for dry, like instant yeast, 5 grams, okay? So 2% salt, 2% fresh yeast, or 1% dry active yeast, or 0.5% of instant yeast, okay? Write those down, that's important. And then the amount of water that you put in is really a function of the recipe that you're doing. But in the focaccia that I make, I have a 1-to-1 ratio, flour to water, okay? And you let it sit and you rise and you can read the instructions. Anyway, it turns out fantastic focaccia. So why is this super fantastic? If I have a huge lasagna pan and I want to make lasagna, no, I'm not making lasagna. Well, I do want to make lasagna, but today I'm making focaccia. And I want to make a focaccia, a big focaccia. I know for my huge lasagna pan, I want 500 grams of flour, 500 grams of water, and then 2% salt, and then the relative percentages of the yeast. Today I'm using dry active yeast, so I want 1%. Okay, now let's say I'm not making such a huge focaccia. I'm gonna make a brownie pan sized of focaccia. Now I happen to know that in this brownie pan, 200 grams of flour is perfect, makes the perfect amount of dough. So 200 grams of flour, 200 grams of water, 2% salt, and the relative percent of the yeast that you're using. Okay, let's say I want to use this pan, smaller than a lasagna pan, but bigger than a brownie pan. Well, you know what? This pan, what's perfect? 350 grams of flour, 350 grams of water, 2% salt, and the relative percentage of the yeast that you're using. Now, it's going to take you a little bit of time to adjust because also, you know, do you like your focaccia really fat and doughy, or do you like it really thin and crispy and greasy? Now, that's how I like my focaccia, but I completely appreciate that you might like yours differently. So listen, it's super easy to experiment making focaccia in different size trays depending on how you like it. Exactly the same amounts of flour and water, 2% salt, and the relative percentage of yeast depending on what kind you're using. And then you follow the directions and you will have the most delicious focaccia on the planet to impress yourself and all of your friends. And it's really easy. Okay, bye for now. Hope you enjoy it.